Welcome into Grind City Media's playoff wrap-up roundtable, brought to you by AutoZone, a.k.a. a postseason spectacular. We have a great crew to break down the Grizzlies season. Joining me in studio is none other than Rob Fischer, along with Chris Vernon. And then on Skype, we have Eric Hasseltine and Mike Wallace. So let's just dive right on into it. The Grizzlies season came to an end with a loss to the Golden State Warriors in the Western Conference semifinals. I'm not quite yet ready for the cliche of don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened, but it was a very fun ride. So let's just jump into it. Rob, for you, when you look back, second youngest team in the NBA, they end up with the second best record in the NBA, the 2 seed in the Western Conference. You had them win their first division title along the way. It falls short, and that's always a bit of a bummer in the conference semifinals. But when you look back at this year, how will you evaluate the success of this young Grizzlies team?
It was a giant leap for this team. You expected them to take a step forward. They took a giant leap this year. And I think Jaren Jackson said it best earlier this week when he said, now that's our expectation, is to win a championship. I think this year it was to take a step and to take a step towards that goal. But now your expectation going into next season is to contend. And that's exciting. I know it's hard to get over that Game 6 loss still, but that's what's exciting to me as the season comes to an end and what this whole season to me meant.
It was a fun series, and Zach Kleiman talked in his exit interviews earlier this week about how, success isn't linear, and yet with this Grizzlies team, it kind of has been linear because you go from the bubble experience to winning a play-in tournament game last year to eventually losing in the first round. Now you make it to the conference semifinals. Vernon, when you look at an opportunity to have this series that you just had against the Golden State Warriors, how does something like that and the games this team experienced help build into something to take into next year?
You usually don't get to do that until you're a lot older. At one point in the series and during the playoffs, I remember, and this is when Dillon Brooks was out, their starting lineup went 22, 23, 19, 22, 23 with Xavier Tillman and Zaire Williams when they were installed into the starting lineup. And the idea that guys that are 22 and 23 years old now have not only, as you mentioned, the bubble and that play-in experience, but then getting to play 5 games in last year's playoffs, getting to play 12. You got 17 games of playoff experience, and you got a group of guys that, for the most part, are under 24 years of age. You're usually 24, 25. Well, you're at least that old by the time you're getting double-digit playoff game experience.
Yeah, you already have those battle-tested moments, and you're so young, it's hard not to get excited about the future and the potential of continuity. And Mike, I'll ask you, just looking at the roster from this year, how is this team built to last, in your opinion?
This is a team that's constructed. Chris Vernon just talked about the age and the experience that they gained in the playoffs. Rob Fischer just gave you the bigger picture view of how you can pretty much encapsulate everything that you saw this season. But to answer your question, Jess, I'm going to go back to December 8th. We were in Miami that day. That was also the day that Zaire Williams had the ankle issue. The Grizzlies were ranked last in the NBA in defense that day, in that month. And then to turn around and finish the season as a top 5 defensive and offensive team, that showed you the improvement that this team made over the course of the season. So this isn't just one thing that they made a leap from last year to this year. They made a gigantic leap within the same season. So that tells you that this team is built the right way. They're constructed the right way. They have leaders on the 10 posts, veterans in the middle, and they have some bright young guys along the way, too, that's going to be here for, the foreseeable future. So they're stock ready to take on and build from this point here.
Yeah, going off what Mike just said, Rob, you and I were talking before the show. When do you look back at the time when this team really proved itself and turned the season around?
Well, I think it was funny. Back in November, the Grizzlies had a back-to-back against the Pelicans and the Rockets, and both teams were on long losing streaks. The Grizzlies had lost 3 straight by double digits in each. The record at the time was 6-7. And they play the Pelicans and get beat in New Orleans to snap their 9-game skid. Now you have Houston at home. They had lost 12 straight. And you're thinking, this is a pivotal game. If you fall to 6-8 and you just lost to the Pelicans and the Rockets, 2 teams with almost double-digit losing streaks, somebody's going to have to answer, whether it's the coach or the front office or individual players. This is a pivotal game. Grizzlies won that one by 30. But then a week later, Ja gets hurt, and you're like, We're a 500 team. That's what we are. After a quarter of the season, that's a big sample size. And then the turnaround just happened. And it was the numbers Mike was talking about. Incredible what happened after that.
Yeah, it's remarkable. And Eric, fun is such a basic word, but it sums up what this year was and what this team is. And often on the radio broadcast, you would get to saying where this team had that ability to just like suck an opponent's soul out from under them. And you would snap and suddenly it was a 10-point lead into a 20-point lead. And you look at the Grizzlies going from being blown out in a certain number of games early in the season to being the team that had 14 wins that were by 25 points or more, which was the second most by an NBA team since the NBA-ABA merger. Then you also have the fact that they're leading the league in blocks, paint points, offensive rebounding, fast break points. When you look back on all of that, what's the identity that this team created throughout this season?
That's, I think that they showed early on, as Rob said, in that first part of the year, and you mentioned as well, they took some hard losses and some lopsided losses because it looked like they just were trying to outscore teams, and they realized getting stops and protecting the paint was going to really benefit them greatly. As you saw the numbers, like you said, they are the number one rebounding team, number one in blocks, number one in steals, fast break points, paint points. And I talked to Taylor Jenkins about the fast break points and the fact that the NBA doesn't even count baskets within 6 seconds after makes by your opponent. So whether a made free throw or a made field goal, and how many times did we see the Grizzlies basically take the ball out of the net, come right back, drive it hard down at their opponent, and either get an open three or a look at the bucket. Taylor Jenkins said that's one of our team goals, is to flip the script like that after a make, and maybe you're feeling good, you look up and the guy your guard's running right by you. So the identity, I think, is that they just don't live in the moment. They continue to focus on the game plan. We've seen them fall behind by multiple, double-digit situations where they've come back. They've just stuck to the game plan, stick to what's working. Rob's been in those huddles. He's reported it on TV. We've all heard it, where Taylor Jenkins just in the huddle basically says, stay with who we are, stay with what our game plan is, which is to continue to attack into the middle, find open looks, and then defensively be on a string, be very, very good, be committed to their principles. So I think that they, despite the fact they are the second youngest team, they're one of the more mature teams, because you can have them down 15-16 and they don't just let go of the rope. I remember that game in Brooklyn where Grizzlies put up figures. It was in January. We were all calling it back in the Lit Lounge, and Brooklyn starts making their run. Kevin Durant starts getting going, and you look up, and after a make, Grizzlies go down and make a three, and then Brooklyn misses, Grizzlies go down, make a two, and after cutting the lead from 12-4, you look back up and it's 13 like 90 seconds later, and Kevin Durant and James Harden are looking at each other going, what the hell, man? Where did these guys come from? So you kind of just break a team spirit, and they're not like that. I think they're incredibly mentally tough, and even though there's some slip-ups in an 82-game season, they displayed that pretty much all year long, and especially in round one of the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was a team that just bought into each other. And you saw that camaraderie and that chemistry continue to develop throughout the year. And Taylor Jenkins, as often says, if you buy into what the team is doing, the individual stuff will take care of itself. And that worked for him, where he finishes second in the year in Coach of the Year voting. You had Zach Kleiman become the youngest person to ever win NBA Executive of the Year. And then, of course, Ja Morant, NBA All-Star starter for the first time and was awarded NBA's Most Improved Player, even though he campaigned for Desmond Bane to win that award all year long. You did have 3 Grizzlies players finish in the top 12 of Sixth Man of the Year voting. Jaren Jackson Jr. in there for Defensive Player of the Year. But let's start with Ja Morant, because he is such a big part of this team. And Chris Vernon, I will ask you, when you look at the leaps that he was able to take this past season in year 3, what impressed you the most?
I think the ability to be that guy and have other teams know that you're that guy. I always talk about the dry erase board. Where are you on that list when you walk into a locker room? And so he was a victim of his own success. He had this unbelievable rookie season. And so then you come back in year 2 and you're at the top of the dry erase board. So now when you're playing Atlanta, you don't get to go up against Trae Young. You have to see DeAndre Hunter. And so year 2 didn't go like Ja wanted it to go. That ascension didn't take place in the second year, but I felt like that's because he was so great his rookie year and his rookie campaign. And so this year, everything that teams threw at him, figuring out a way to navigate that while still being great, that's when you're not a star. That's when you are a superstar, right? That's the difference, because you're the guy. every single night that these teams are trying to stop. And some guys, they just stop at star, right? And they never ascend to that next level. And so I think the fact that he ascended to becoming a superstar, handling everything that people threw at him, and then 5 minutes left in the game, becoming that guy. There was no question who was going to have the ball in their hands and who was going to decide it for the Grizzlies.
Yeah, that superstardom encompassing so much more than the style of play and the highlight machine, that speaks for itself. But then to also see recently, he's on a national Hulu ad. Every time I turn on my TV, there's Ja Morant sitting on a couch in lime green. He is on the Beats commercials at this point. You have a song with it. You have the top 10 jersey sales movement into that position. You have all of the impressions of social media as well. His star is growing. He's in a city like Memphis that, let's face it, sometimes gets a knock for being a small market team, but he has ascended outside of that. And Mike, when you look at this past year, you had the regular season, you have the ups and downs. It stinks that they weren't able to finish out the series with him and what he could have brought in that series against the Golden State Warriors in the conference semifinals. But when you look at how he was able to play in the playoffs and already establishing a couple of those iconic playoff moments, what stands out to you in terms of even his development and learning curve from the regular season into the postseason?
Number one, that Ja is fearless. Like there's nothing that he feels like he can't do. There's no situation that he feels like he can't succeed in. Because when you think about it, when everyone was sort of questioning his three-point shooting ability, look at his point shooting percentages, and they're pretty respectable. When you look at the fact that, you wonder, do you force him right because he goes left so strongly? The number of times he's done up and unders and had guys on skates thinking that they had him pegged to one direction or another, and he put up a highlight move or a highlight moment. This guy's conquered the game one-on-one. So as Chris said, you're not going to stop him one-on-one. It's a matter of now, can Ja elevate to playing chess game after game, series after series, because he's got checkers mastered right now. He has that mastered from that standpoint. So growing into his brand, growing into his body are the next two things that he needs to take on, because his brand, we're seeing the national exposure. We saw the social media superstar that he's become. Now there comes responsibility to that. Is he going to be able to be consistent and mature as someone that you can have your brand be represented by? Is that next shoe going to be a signature Ja? I think he's in line for that. Don't look, Kyrie Irving could be losing his deal for Nike. Ja Morant could slip easily into that same type of situation. I would love to see that. But then growing into his body. He's a superstar this year, absolutely. But can he play 75 games? Can he stay healthy? That's the next level of growth.
And now having an off season where the good news was with that injury, non-surgical, so it's just a matter of him offloading, taking the time. No one wants to be in the gym more than Ja Morant, so that'll be the toughest thing for him to do, but staying involved with the game. And going into next year, the continuing evolution of his partnership with Jaren Jackson Jr. So much of this team ceiling hinges on those two unlocking their full potential. We saw nuggets of it throughout the season, but Fish, when it comes to Jaren growing alongside with Ja Morant, what did you see from Jaren, and what's that next step for him as he goes into next year?
I think number one on the list for Jaren Jackson Jr.'s season this past season, he played 78 games. The question was, how many games could Jaren play? Because of injury the last few seasons. He played 78 games and really missed the four mostly because of rest. To me, that's the biggest thing. But then you look at the play on the floor. I mean, his offense, maybe not as consistently great as you'd like to see every night, but he became a defensive stopper. He became a one of the best defensive players in all of the league, and that has been established throughout this season, is that his availability on the floor is his best ability. It's just him being on the floor, what the impact that he can make on a nightly basis.
Impact in terms of staying healthy enough,
Yep.
Impact in terms of not getting in foul trouble, and we
Yes.
saw that throughout the playoffs, the importance there. So much of that, and him becoming the defensive anchor through all of the ups and downs of injuries and COVID, the consistent piece was Jaren, and that was a huge part of all of their success. Eric, I'll ask you, you have Ja, you have Jaren. Who was the next most important player for this Grizzlies team this year?
Well, I mean, to me, it's a toss-up because Desmond Bane's ability to stretch the floor was huge, and you could say that's that. And his growth was phenomenal. I mean, stepping in to the third point guard role as well as being the consistent outside shooter. I mean, it's a guy who, for the first time since Mike Miller was on the roster, you feel like every three-pointer he takes is going in, and the ability of Desmond to recognize when to shoot, when not to shoot, and to step up and say, hey, look, I want to go to Las Vegas in the summer of 2021 and learn how to facilitate the offense and be more valuable to this team was huge. So he's got to be right there in that conversation. And I think you have to make arguments for both Steven Adams or Tyus Jones. Adams' ability to protect the paint leaves Jaren the ability to, go and basically from the weak side block shots, which he's terrific at. His timing sensational, and also play the passing lane. Talk about Jaren's blocks, but he had a lot of steals. Well, a lot of that is because Steven Adams occupies that middle. You feel good about him securing a defensive rebound. You can be a little more aggressive. Plus, his screens are massive. And you got to break down what Tyus Jones meant to this ball club. Ja's out for 25 regular season games, and Tyus just steps in, and all he does is set the NBA record for assist-to-turnover ratio. When you've got a point guard that will take care of the ball, that will move the basketball. And look, when he was relied upon to actually add some scoring in the offense, he did just that. In those starts, he wasn't an offensive liability. His numbers don't pop off the charts as a backup guard like a Tyler Hero or a Jamal Crawford used to, or Lou Williams, or whatever you want to do, or whoever you want to pick in that role. But when you needed him to score in those starting roles, he did. And when you needed him just to steady the offense and facilitate and help that second unit either extend the lead or cut into a deficit, most nights he was there to do that.
And that's the luxury of this team's depth, where you can list off a number of guys and make legitimate cases for each of them. And as you mentioned, Eric, Tyus Jones, a huge part of that in the backup point guard role. Him and Kyle Anderson, free agents going into this offseason. Vernon, what do you think the market is like for those two, and just evaluate their place within the team?
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting on both fronts, because on Tyus's, with the cap going to be going up and there will be more teams that are flush with money in 2 years, it might actually behoove both the Grizzlies and Tyus to have a 1-year marriage where he can make a good chunk of change and come back here for 1 year and then re-enter the market the next year where there are more teams with more money. If he wants to be a starter, you're not going to be able to fulfill that need for him. But I also think that he did love it here. What you don't want is to have to leave a bunch of money on the table in order to be here. So that would be an in-between. If you could keep Tyus, I think they would. I think they'd be well served to keep him. Kyle's an interesting one because he's due a payday again. Great all-around basketball player. If the price is reasonable, I think there's absolutely no reason why you wouldn't want to have him in the fold again. He's just bailed you out of so many situations. Small forwards are hurt. He's there. Need another guy that can handle the ball in backup point guard situations. He's been there. Needed a power forward to start every game last season. He was there. He's just one of those guys that Kyle Anderson is one of the very few guys in the NBA. You could plop him on any of the NBA teams, literally any team in the NBA, and he will be useful and have a place. And so same thing goes with the Grizzlies. You can be useful and have a place here. It's just going to be a matter of, I want all these guys to make all the money they can, because what Kyle has brought to this franchise has been great. And I love having those veteran leaders around. It's just a money game.
Absolutely. And both of them, I was going to say both of them are examples, but really the whole Grizzlies team is that ability to embrace whatever role is necessary for you. And Steven Adams has talked about the system of the Grizzlies and Taylor Jenkins so often this season, but both of them are just primary examples of when your number's called, step into the starting lineup. If you need to be coming off the bench, hey, that's cool. You're helping the team out in whatever way necessary. Mike, for you, when you look back, we've mentioned so many names. Is there a player who surprised you in their performance this season?
That's a great question. I'm not sure if anyone surprised me. The first name that came to mind when you mentioned the question was Zaire Williams, but he told me from day one that, he's not here to be a project. He's here to be a productive role player. And after he got hurt and with the ankle issue, you expected him to sort of taper off and go away. But he came back from that ankle issue even better. He started scoring from 3 different levels. He was a defensive player as well. And obviously he was the finisher on a lot of those highlight dunks. So Zaire Williams being able to be sort of questioned at the beginning when the Grizzlies moved up to draft him, to trying to figure out whether he was going to play and have a role, to actually him now being an essential part of this young core moving forward, to do it so quickly, I think he sort of encapsulates everything that goes on with this youth movement for the Grizzlies.
And we always know that he will be hydrated forever and always going into every season from here on out. No, it's true. Seeing his growth and his abilities to just embrace big moments as a rookie certainly add a lot of promise. Fish, for you, in your opinion, what's the biggest question for this team going into the offseason now?
what it's going to look like next year. I mean, this front office is active. This front office has a lot of assets that they can use. We already talked about the two guys that are free agents. I mean, is it the same starting five going into next season? I don't know. I think because of where you're at now, there's that next step. So who's a part of that next step? Who could be different part of that next step? I think that's going to be exciting to watch for this offseason.
Absolutely. The bar has been set. And Eric, I'll end with you. This team can't surprise anyone anymore. The Grizzlies, as they announced to everyone nationally, we're here. You can expect to see a lot more of them. You can expect a lot more attention on this group. When you look at the Western Conference, and this is a way too far look ahead going into next season because we're still in the NBA playoffs, but where do you see the Grizzlies fitting in terms of their potential for next season? Where will the conversation sit going into next year?
Well, you can tell it's going to be a gauntlet again next year. It'll depend on what happens in Phoenix. We saw Chris Paul really struggle towards the end of those playoffs, but Dallas has found their rhythm. Golden State has a few more years left on that group, in my opinion. Denver's going to get healthier with Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. The Clippers could get healthy with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. Minnesota's shown they're a very good team. So they're right there in the pecking order of teams that should be favored to win the West next year. And like you said, they're not going to sneak up on anybody. You're not going to catch a team full of superstars thinking, oh, we can just cruise into this when the Grizzlies are a nice story, but we've got the advantage. No, this team will embarrass you if you go out and do not come out and bring your A game, because that's what they're capable of. We've seen it twice in the playoffs where they've really just, either made huge comebacks or had a blowout victory over a really good team. Now, they've gone the opposite side as well, and as they grow in less times, as we saw in the regular season this year, that happens more on your side. You just turn heads. So I think looking ahead to next year, this may be the first time in a very long time that the prognosticators actually get close to the actual number. They tend to be very low on Grizzlies totals. I think it's going to be one of the higher predictions starting the season. Saw how
expectations will be high. The season will be here before we know it. Fish, Vernon, Mike Wallace, Eric Hasseltine, we all thank you for joining us. We thank you for following the Grizzlies for another fun and exciting season. The draft will be here before we know it. Training camp will be here before we know it. We'll be back with more. Be sure to follow grindcitymedia.com for all your Grizzlies coverage forever and always. Until next time, we'll see you then.